So we'll talk now a little bit about obstacles to fish movement in rivers, again in relation to how it's recorded for the SFCC habitat training purposes. So most people know what an obstacle to fish movement is, something that causes some kind of problem for fish as they move either upstream or downstream in our river systems. And there's a variety of different types of actual structure that we can record, and structures will vary enormously in terms of their impact or potential impact on fish passage. For the SFCC method, you are asked to record the actual structure as one of the acronyms here. It's ranging from bridge aprons into water gates, gravel cones, fallen trees, fish passes, and I'm assuming that most people will be able to recognise what all of these actually are. Within some of the culverts come in many different shapes and sizes, as do things like bridge aprons and weirs in particular, a huge number of variety of different weirs. So I'm just going to go through some of the kind of issues, some of the things that are associated with our assessment of the structures themselves. There is a technique that you can do, which has been developed under contracted to Sniffer, which we were involved in putting together, which you can find through Sniffer's website to do with the WFD 1112A project, which is actually a rapid assessment tool for looking at barriers. But for the SFCC type of assessment, you're doing quite a quick assessment of the structure itself, but when you do it quickly, you shouldn't be doing it inaccurately, so this should hopefully give you a bit of an indication of the things to look for of relevance for fish. So the key thing here really is you're only really recording the categories where they constitute a potential obstacle to fish movement. It's up to you to decide that. If in doubt, take lots of pictures, make some notes, and you can then discuss it with other colleagues and other people that might have different ideas and different levels of experience. But taking pictures is very important when you're actually looking at obstacles in general. So what are the kind of things that can impede movement to fish? Anything really that can alter the behaviour or that results in a delay or stopping of movement. What kinds of barriers do we have? What kinds of obstacles are there? We've got physical things, that's the things we all recognise, a leap that they have to make. They have to swim against an increased velocity, or there's a reduction in depth of water. All of these things can be associated with one particular feature. Often you'll find that there's one little pinch point in a structure that might be the bit that you're really interested in, that the water's all accelerating through a very narrow gap, or that it's all falling down a vertical face. And these are the things that we would actually be concerned about in terms of their possible impact for fish. But there's also things in rivers that can constitute obstacles for fish in terms of their chemical nature. A temperature barrier. If water temperatures increase locally, it can be a problem. If water temperature is very low, fish can't swim as efficiently. Dissolved oxygen is related to temperature, and that can be a barrier too if you have a water quality issue. Behavioural different barriers where we have light. Fish sometimes aren't going to kind of be attracted into a darkened tunnel, so there might be a barrier in terms of their behaviour. They're just not wanting to move into, say, a long extended culvert, even though the water is suitable depth and suitable velocity. If it's dark, then they might be stopped going in there. Or there might be something like an orifice, an opening, a size that isn't suitable for fish to get into. And then we've also got to think about areas that might be slightly remote from the area you're particularly looking at, in that low flows, abstraction of water from further upstream in a river system might end up altering the characteristics of the water through a particular section and create a restriction in terms of its suitability for fish passage. And that might be that where you have an off-take for say a hydro in an area of dewatered channel, that potentially could be an obstacle to fish. But there's nothing that you can put you can actually say, actually here and now there's an obstacle. So really, for the purposes of doing anything to do with barriers, you've got to think like a fish. Think of everything from the perspective of a fish. It doesn't matter if what you're looking at is a weir or a dam or something that's been made by man. In terms of the fish and what they're going to do, is they're going to have to try and approach that and get up it or down it in one piece. And so think about whether we've got, what are the challenges for fish? Does it mean they've got to jump? Does it mean they've got to swim quickly? Does it mean they have to kind of get themselves through a very shallow section of water? So really we're looking at leaps, we're looking at increased velocity of water and also reduced water depth. So it doesn't really matter what it is, they're all going to present similar challenges for fish. So if we break it down into the actual kinds of type of obstacles we have here, vertical drops, velocity, obstacles, turbulence, obstacles at the length of structures, very long structures can tire fish out, water depth can be reduced, we can have debris blocking structures, and ultimately we've got the kind of the possibility of cumulative effects as well. If you have a series of small obstacles, by the end of fish getting to the last one, they're going to have less energy, and might be that it's going to be a problem for fish to get through. So, for example, you have a vertical drop. A description of this would be that there's a drop that fish have to jump through, and the impact for certain fish is maybe you have fish species you're interested in that can't jump. So fish are unable to get past it, or if they make repeated attempts at it, they injure themselves, cause wounding, cause places that you can get secondary infections in them, and they can use too much energy in trying to get out of obstacles, which then lessens their opportunities for getting to their spawning locations and successfully reproducing. So the various kinds of things we might be looking at from obstacles, from very small ones to very large ones. They're not always just the big waterfalls or huge vertical weirs. Bridge aprons where we have an increased water velocity, some kind of restriction in the water going through a bridge apron. Important considerations here are that we've got to think about the water velocity and depth going through these particular features. In some instances they might be very benign, there might be nothing there at all. In other ones they're very obvious, an acceleration of flow, and you might have a restriction in the water depth. Often there'll be a hydraulic head difference, there'll be a gradient change across the structure itself, and that itself is going to cause an increase in water velocity. And in some instances there'll be a drop at the downstream end of structures, and this is going to present a challenge for fish in terms of they have to actually leap to get up onto the structure itself, and then a secondary challenge will be that across a ford or a bridge apron you might well have a reduced water depth, so they're jumping up into a reduced water depth. Culverts come in many shapes and sizes. Essentially, things to consider here is we've got to think about how long a culvert is. How long is the challenge actually lasting for? Do the fish have to jump into a culvert? Do they have to actually get in there and swim for 5 seconds, or is it 30 seconds or so? Because that's going to have a bearing upon how well fish can actually, how many fish can get through structures. So we've got to think about not only the length of them, but the water depth and the velocity within them. In this instance here, we've got a very obvious man-made box structure here, and the water depth and velocity in here is going to be the issue. The water velocity is okay, but the water depth is down at about 2 centimetres, and for a large fish that's clearly going to be a barrier in itself. In some instances it's the size of the gap that can be the problem. Fish aren't very willing to jump into or move through small pipes, and we've got to think about multi-array situations here where we've got numerous different pipes that fish can actually use to get through. So there's a lot of different things to consider in culverts. Dams, typically those structures at 5 metres high, difficult to really assess from fish passage. Normally they have a fish pass associated with them, and we're not really doing this to assess a fish pass itself. But really, if you come across a dam when you're doing these SFCC surveys, you should be thinking about noting down things to do with the function of the dam. Is it for water use? Has it got hydro attached to it? Is it now a defunct old dam like this example here? Maybe try and find out the ownership. And is there a presence or absence of a fish pass? And is the fish pass actually working? Weirs are by far and away the most numerous and varied type of structure that we have, and going from ones that are still working and very active to old defunct ones that seem to have no purpose whatsoever. So sometimes you'll find them in association with things like bridges. You'll find them in the middle of nowhere with no apparent function whatsoever, and they may have been to divert water off into a now kind of overgrown and ruined mill structure, or to irrigate fields, or who knows what they were for, but they seem to be everywhere. And they'll range from flow gauging stations that are still active, that are used by EA or SEPA, right to things that are in place to try and hold gravel back, try and remove sediment from rivers, to things that are there to protect founds of bridges. But they all have similar types of issues for fish. They all, depending upon whether they're gauging weirs or non-gauging weirs, they all create a difference in the head height. So from the top to the bottom, whether it's a vertical face or a sloping face, fish still need to get across that gradient change. Fish passes, we are kind of asked to look at fish passes, and as we all know, fish passes don't always work out exactly the way they were designed or people envisaged them being. You can have good fish passes and bad fish passes. Often fish passes seem to be rather incomplete. This example here really expected to be extended down for it to be functioning. Lots of water turbulence associated with fish passes, and there is guidance available with the Environment Agency's Fish Pass manual for specific details for what is a good fish pass. But many fish passes remain obstacles for some fish species. They may have been designed for a salmon or a trout, but other fish like lamprey or other fish of interest might struggle to get through the flow conditions within fish passes. So be aware of that. If it's got a fish pass, don't just tick a box and say yes, everything's fine, because in a lot of cases you really have to look and you'll find that they actually aren't functioning or don't look as if they would function particularly well. So is it effective? Think about the dimensions of the pools, think about water depths, water velocities in the pass, and make notes, take pictures, make notes, and then it might mean that you have to come back and do a more detailed survey on the fish pass itself to see what's actually happening in it. And this reference here just shows you how you can get the information on the Fish Pass manual from the Environment Agency. So it's not always just, obstacles are not always associated with man-made structures. We have purely natural things. Debris dams can form in natural forestry and commercial forestry as well, and they can cause temporary features which, they're going to range in severity, and they're worth noting down. They can potentially cause restrictions under certain flow conditions. You've got to think about what kind of obstacle they're creating. The structures, debris dams, are passable to fish under high flow conditions anyway. Waterfalls, if we're looking at waterfalls, it's very important that you try to get pictures of them and assess how high they are. Looking at the features underneath them, whether you've got depth of water underneath them allows fish to jump from them. Whether there's other multiple routes through waterfalls. They don't always have a nice, easy kind of cascading flow down the side of them. They can be mixed between kind of waterfalls and cascading water, and having fish kind of half swimming and half jumping up them, and they can cause problems because of them, of that kind of mix of requirement. But really, we've got to think about the hydraulic head. We've got to think about how high the differences between the top and the bottom. The depth of the water in the pool, the number of channels that are available, and also another thing to consider is whether there's a possibility that downstream migrating fish are going to get damaged as they come down. If you have fish moving down a waterfall, then if there isn't a significant depth of water for them to fall into, then it's possible that they're going to damage themselves on hard surfaces as they fall down. So in your SFCC habitat assessment, you're asked whether the structure is passable. So is it passable? If you were to say no from an upstream and downstream direction, then you've got to think about why you're making that decision. You might think that it's just impassable from an upstream direction because maybe it's 3 or 4 metres high, fish aren't able to jump up it, but it would still be passable if fish coming downstream. Then you've got this kind of category where you've got, yes, it's either species or flow dependent, and that's one that you've got to think about a lot more. Possibly your structure is going to be able to be passed under higher water conditions. And then if you're confident there's no problem with it, you can put down yes. And often what happens is people put down the question marks. And if you're going to put down question marks, then you've got to think about adding notes and putting down justification as to why you believe it to be something you're unsure about. So there are issues depending upon the species and the adult size, the flows, and other information that you need to have as to whether or not these locations are going to be problems or not. For more information you can get on this methodology I mentioned at the Sniffer website. You can find out a bit more of a robust and specific technique for looking at obstacles for fish. Things that we don't know much about is temperature in specific locations, effective temperature on fish swimming, and it's pretty clear that water temperature is going to have a massive impact upon whether fish can get up and down, specifically up structures. This graph here is really showing body length of fish in relation to the maximum swimming speed at different temperatures, and as temperature goes up, so the actual maximum swimming speed of the fish goes up. So maximum swimming speeds increases with body length and also with water temperature. Okay, so that's the maximum swimming speed. That's the kind of swimming speed that they can get to, the highest one they've got. But also, we look at another kind of swimming, which is endurance swimming, which is a sustained kind of marathon runner type of swimming that you see and fish need to get, when they're in migrations upstream. Again, body length here against the endurance swimming speed, and you can see the relationship has changed here. We've got increasing temperature, meaning that we've actually got endurance swimming is improved at lower temperatures for a given fish size. So if you've got water temperature that's low, fish are more able to swim at a kind of endurance rate, but they're not very good at burst swimming at the very fast swimming. They may need to get up a very steep, very fast flowing feature. So knowing what time of year the fish get to things is very important too, and the water temperature they're actually tackling structures. So, are things passable? Consider the water depth, consider water velocities. Structural complexity at sites is a big issue. You're not going to know what this is like at all times of the year if you're just looking at it at one point. So take some pictures, try to look around at the location, look for where fish might actually use to get passage across structures. So if you're going to put down question marks, then you need to provide additional notes to justify your decision. And that's where taking photographs and putting down a good lot of descriptions as to why you might think it's a problem is very important. Got to consider situations under high flows. A lot of fish, certainly salmonids, tend to migrate more readily and certainly in smaller channels under higher flow conditions. Look at the sides. Are there channels that might open up under higher flows? Are they just ephemeral, they're only there for a while, but they could still provide some kind of opportunity for fish to get through? Consider under high flows how water is going to back up and water levels will change. And look at the kind of the porosity of the structure. Are there things other channels there that you can't maybe see? If you've got something like a beaver dam or a debris dam, there's going to be channels underneath the water surface that you might not be able to see, but look for where water's coming through. Record good notes and photographs. That's the key here. Okay, so this idea of thinking like a fish, that's what it's all about. Look at an obstacle, try to get downstream from it, locate yourself so you can look at it from a fish approaching it from downstream. Often fish are attracted to where you've got a very high kind of velocity gradient. So where you've got high water velocity coming in right next to water that's very still, that's the kind of attraction point for fish. They're very much attracted to those points, and also where it's a stability of that gradient is there. So things aren't changing very often, but it's that attraction flow they want to go through. So they'll be attracted into areas where you have water plunging into still water. That's where they want to actually go to. And whether they can get up it or not is another matter, but that's where they'll actually be attracted to in the majority of instances. But these red arrows here are just looking at potential areas that you could think of for fish to get through. They don't always have to attack an obstacle at the same location. So some might try and jump up a structure, some might swim up the side. Some might use the fish pass, some might try and take the side of the fish pass and be unsuccessful. But think about various locations they may try. And across the structure from left to right bank, there will be definitely be different depths, different flow velocities. In this example here, you do find fish, depending upon their size and their swimming ability, will be able to pass a structure at different locations. This slightly shallower area here, we were finding on the day we looked at this, smaller trout were getting up this side here, and large salmon were getting up on the right bank. But there was, the two were not mixing very well, but they were able to kind of both get up the structure, but at different locations. So think about that as well when you're looking at a particular location. And then, fish, depending on what you're interested in, if you're looking at salmon can jump, we all know that. But lampreys can't jump, but they can swim up structures. Salmon and sea trout very good at swimming, but they need a certain depth of water. Then if we're looking at eels and elvers going upstream, they don't need much water at all. As long as they have a climbing substrate, they can get up the side of various kind of obstacles that would stop any other actively swimming fish. So it's not always about the salmon, but consider different fish modes of swimming when you're actually assessing your structure. It may be that you're only interested in it from salmonids, but if you have to do this for lamprey, then think about what they have to, how they're actually able to swim as well.